I don't like to wait. And if you're anything like me, you probably don't like waiting either. And waiting's only made more difficult, isn't it, when it's unexpected. Or you don't know how long it's going to last. Or you don't understand why you're having to wait at that moment. And so I wanted to wait just long enough to maybe make you feel a little bit uncomfortable and ask, kind of questions. What on earth is he doing? Why isn't he saying anything? Is something wrong? Because if you'd known I was going to wait, if I told you beforehand that after I've prayed I'm going to wait for a few moments, you'd have probably all been sat there, it's all right. But what makes it awkward is when you weren't expecting it, the fact that you didn't know it was coming, that you didn't know how long it was going to last, and that you didn't understand why. And the thing is in life that we often find ourselves in times where we're having to wait that are just like that. I think most of us probably feel like we've been living in that place for a long time now. We weren't expecting COVID. We have no idea how long it's going to last. It just seems to keep going. And we don't understand why it's happening. These kind of things, even without COVID, when you just start thinking through life, we all face different ways at different times when we find ourselves having to wait that are like that, don't we? Where something comes along and we weren't expecting it, or we don't know how long we're going to have to be waiting for with it. And we don't understand why it's going on in the first place. And because we all face times where we're having to wait like that, a really important question, a really important thing for us to learn is how to wait well. And I mentioned earlier on, didn't I, at the start, today is the first Sunday of Advent, and I say it's not quite December yet, but yeah, Advent starts a little bit earlier than that, and things. And Advent is a time of anticipation. It's a time of preparation. It's a time of waiting. It's a time where we know how long it's going to last for. We kind of know 25th of December, that's the end. Christmas is here. We get to celebrate. All is good. We're looking forward to that kind of day. But Advent is also a time which is kind of built in to help us to remember and to think about the fact that we are anticipating, that we're in a season now of waiting and longing for when Jesus is going to come again. This sense that in this season where we are right now in life, there is a waiting and a longing that will be there until he comes and makes things different. And every one of us have situations where we're waiting on God, for healing, for broken relationships to be restored, for a change in a situation, for friends or family to come to know Jesus for themselves, for guidance or provision or clarity over something, And so the question is, how do we wait well? And I think it's such an important question, but it's one that we rarely ask. In times of waiting, the question that I most often ask myself is not how can I wait well, but how can I make the waiting as short as possible? And that's the whole way that our culture shapes us to think. So much of our technology has kind of been developed in order to try and stop us from having to wait. To make things kind of instantaneous as much as possible. The changing the way we communicate, I think, is an amazing example of this. If you think about kind of written communication, it used to be that you'd write a letter and you'd have to send it off in the post, and it would be days before the other person got it. You had no idea when they were going to write one back, and then eventually you'd get something in response. I used to have a pen pal when I was a child, and it could be months between those kind of letters, and you just kind of learned to expect the waiting. And then they introduced emails. Send the email off, and it gets there instantly, but you've no idea when the other person's going to look at it. It goes to a computer, and they're not at the computer all of the time, and so you got to kind of wait till they're going to have a look at it before you get a response. And then they introduced mobile phones with text messages. And so the text message gets sent, and you know the other person's likely to have their phone on them, and so it's just a matter of when are they going to check it and reply. And then the ultimate bane of communication, instant messaging with things like WhatsApp and Facebook, where not only do they get, you know that they get it instantly, but you get notified when they've looked at it. You can see when they've seen it. And then you're like, why haven't they sent me one back? Why haven't they responded yet? And what even worse than that, when you can see they've received it, and then you get the dot, 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 dot. They're writing a reply, and then the dots stop. Nothing comes through. You know they've seen it. You know they've thought about replying, and yet they've not sent you one. And you're there, and you're waiting, and you're frustrated because you want an instant response. We don't like to wait, do we? And we want to get through the waiting as quickly as possible. But actually, what we need to learn is how to wait well. You see, it's often in the season of waiting that God shows up and works in ways that we never expected. You know, that's what we see throughout the Bible again and again. You see, the Bible is full of people who waited on God. You have Abraham and Sarah who wait on God for a child. Jacob who waits for years for Rachel to become his wife. Joseph who waits to be released from prison. You know, Noah who waits for a flood and then has to wait for the flood to be gone. You know, look at the lives of Moses or David or pretty much any of the kind of heroes of the faith. You know, when you look through the heroes of the faith, pretty much it's a list of the who's who of waiting. And as we think about Advent and then Christmas, you know, when Jesus came into the world was in a time of great waiting. You see, if you open your Bible up, you'll see that there is just one page between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Just one page. We just kind of flick it over and we jump there and we get there straight away. But that one page represents 400 years of waiting. 400 years of holding on to the promises of God. Holding on to the things that he'd spoken through the prophets, some of those even longer ago than that. The promise that God was going to send a person who will deliver them, who will lead them, who will bring them into right relationship with him. You know, the last verse that we read in the Old Testament, the last two verses that we read in the Old Testament, in Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, God is speaking through the prophet. This is what he says. He says, "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents. Or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction." And then there's nothing. 400 years. Now imagine what the people must have thought during this time. As they hold on to these promises, but nothing seems to happen. Where is he? You know, there are no great prophets bringing God's word anymore. No more encounters with angels. Wondering, God, have you forgotten about us? Do you care? Why are things like this? Did we get it wrong? How long is this going to last? And not just waiting with these questions for a year or a decade, but for hundreds of years, through generations. And if you've ever been through a time of waiting, you'll know that as time passes, you know, the enemy, he can try and take hold of your questions, valid, reasonable, good questions, nothing wrong with asking the questions, but he'll take hold of those questions to twist them, to try and instead stir and cause doubt and fear to grow. You know, maybe you can relate to something of that. Maybe you've been there or you're there now. And if that's you, I want you to know that you are in good company, because the heroes of the faith are those who wait well. You know, after 400 years, then we come to the New Testament, we flip that page to the story of Christmas, the arrival of Jesus. And, you know, many of us are familiar with that story after the years of kind of hearing it and reading it and different things. But, you know, what's the first sign that things are changing? The first sign that the waiting is coming to an end. You know, before an angel ever appears to Mary or Joseph, an angel appears to someone else. This is what we read in Luke 1, verses 5 to 17. It says, in the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless, because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Once, when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshippers were praying outside. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John." I love this little promise for any child. "He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born." Now just remember the words that we've read from Malachi 400 years earlier. The angel goes on and says, "He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." You have Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth, godly people who are waiting and longing for the fulfillment of God's promise, spoken hundreds of years earlier. Godly people who have lived a long life. We're told that they're very old. We don't know how old, but they're very old. And for years they've been coming to God in prayer, pleading with him, crying out, longing for a child. Wondering if it will ever happen. And in a moment, an angel appears to Zechariah and everything changes. And I don't think there are any coincidences here. Do you know what Zechariah's name means? It means the Lord has remembered. 400 years of nothing. And then God shows up and sends an angel to speak to a man whose name basically means, "I remember." And do you know what his wife Elizabeth's name means? Her name means God's oath or God's promise or God's covenant. And so God sends an angel to a couple whose names together literally mean God remembers his promises. Isn't that amazing? This is what kind of Advent is really all about. This is where we're kind of at with things. As we celebrate the Christmas story, we remember in our waiting that God remembers his promises. God keeps his promises. He did for them, and he will for you. And we need to be reminded of this truth again and again and again if we are going to be people who wait well. Because this truth gives us hope, and hope is what keeps us going. I came across a medical study recently with 122 men who had recently just suffered their first heart attack, and they were evaluated based on their levels of hope. I have no idea how they determined hope levels, all that kind of stuff. But out of the 25 men who they determined to be the most pessimistic, 21 of them died within 8 years. And out of the 25 men that they determined to be the most optimistic, only 6 of them did. And so they determined from this medical study that losing hope increased the odds of death more than 300%, more than any other risk factor. Here's the good news for me that I found in that. It means that it is healthier for me to eat a full English breakfast and have hope than it is for me to eat a kale salad and be in despair. It's good news for someone who likes their food. Bacon sandwiches at men's breakfast, they can keep coming. On a more serious note, we can be people of hope. We can have hope in the waiting. We can wait well because we know that God is coming, that good is coming because God remembers his promises. He keeps his promises. And if having hope in the midst of the waiting is so important, I want us to look at 3 other reasons why we can have hope. 3 truths that I think help us to wait well is the first one. And we've been singing about it. Our last song before I came up to share, here it is. God works while you wait. God works while you wait. In Isaiah 64, verse 4, it says this: "Since ancient times no one has heard, no ear has perceived, no eye has seen any God besides you, who acts, who works on behalf of those who wait for him." It says, if you wait on me, I will work for you. If you keep following me, even if you don't see what I am doing, even if you don't feel it, even if that's not there, I am at work for your good and for my glory. It may not be in the way that we want. It may not be at the time that we want. But you have a promise-keeping God who has infinite wisdom, who knows everything, who has all information. He's the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. That means that he stands at the end of time, knowing all things, and makes his decisions in the now based on that. Whereas we stand in the now with such limited information and then wonder why we don't understand. Because we don't have the information. We don't see the big picture. God does, and we can trust him that he is at work. When you are wondering where God is and you're struggling to hear his voice, trust that his hands are active, that he is at work. And I think we get a great example of this in the 400 years of waiting that we've kind of talked about between the Old and the New Testament. As the Jewish people wondered, God, where are you? What are you doing? What's happening? Why is it taking so long? We don't get a lot of information from the Bible. That one page that's in between the two is blank. But we do get some information from the history books that I think can be really helpful. 2 key things happened in that period and that I just think were key in God's kind of purposes as to the way that he was going to work. Alexander the Great established the Greek Empire. And with one of the things that he decided to do as part of that was that he decided to establish a common language. He didn't want other people translating or interpreting what he was saying because he wanted every person to be able to understand his words for themselves to make sure nothing was lost or twisted or anything else. He wanted him to be able to make a command in one place and for that command to go out and everybody to understand it right across the empire. And so he developed this universal language that spread across the known world during these 400 years as everyone starts to speak Koine Greek. And this is the language that almost all of the New Testament is written in. And then after Alexander the Great came the Roman Empire. And one of the things that was established through the Roman Empire was what's called the Pax Romana. It was the peace of Rome, where through kind of their military might, they wanted to guarantee the safety of every person within the empire to be able to travel freely. And they built roads and created transport networks so that that was possible. And so in this time of waiting, when the people of Israel are wondering, God, where are you? What are you doing? Why is this taking so long? A universal language is introduced, a language that meant that when Jesus came into the world, the good news about who he was able to kind of spread safely across the empire because of the Pax Romana to spread, and everybody was able to understand it for themselves. You know, it laid the foundations, it put the things in place. Even though no one could see it, no one understood, God was at work in this time, in this waiting to transform the situation outside of Israel. It's to put in place those foundations so that every person could hear the good news of Jesus. God sees the bigger picture. You know, the way that maybe our circumstances and situations need to change, the preparation work that needs to be done, the foundations to be put in place. You may not always see it, but God works while you wait. And God is not just working on situations and circumstances outside of us. No, I think the second thing is that in the waiting, you are becoming. Because God is more interested in who you are than what you do or what you have. He is at work in you in the waiting to see you become the person that he's created you to be. We read earlier about Zechariah and Elizabeth. They had been living in this time of waiting. And all throughout, do you know what they were doing? They were becoming. You know, I love the way that they're described, and, you know, it's just a beautiful statement, a way for anybody to be described. How wonderful is this? That they're described as they were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. You know, even when they looked at the world and they didn't understand what was happening and it felt like nothing made sense, they stuck with God. And as we stick with God in the waiting, he works not only outside of us in the circumstances and the situations, but he works within us to prepare us for what he has in store for us. You know, there are things that I know people are waiting for, and I don't understand why God hasn't intervened. Why the situations are still the same in different ways. But what I do know is that there are things that you learn in the waiting that you cannot learn any other way. Waiting causes us to wrestle. It causes us to wrestle with what we really believe about who God is, what we know about his character. And that wrestling leads us to depths of trust in God that produces a joy and a strength and a hope that means that we can stand, that means that we're prepared, that means that we're able to be the people that he's calling us to be. And that would never come through any other way. God won't waste a time of waiting. He's not just at work outside of us, but within us. That we might become the people that he has created us to be. When it comes to wondering where God is and what he's doing, this is something that Peter says. This is 2 Peter 3, 8 and 9. He says, "Do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you." Do you know, often when we're in a time of waiting and praying and seeking God, we can feel like we're the ones being patient with him. And I wonder if sometimes God is being slow. He is holding back because actually he's being patient with us. You know, as parents, and lots of you will have had this, I do it all the time, kids will ask for things, and you say no. But it's not that you don't want to bless them. It's not that you don't want good things for them. It's not that what they've asked for is wrong. What they've asked for is really good. But what you really mean when you say no is not yet. It's not the right time. Either the circumstances or the situation isn't right for it right now. It's it's not the time to start an episode yet again because we're going to sit down and have dinner. It's just the wrong situation. It's not a no, but it's a not yet. Or there's a process of growth and maturing that they need to go through in order for them to be ready for the thing that they're asking for to be a blessing rather than to cause them harm. You know, if Evan asks me for the keys to the car because he wants to go for a drive at 11 years old, I'm going to say no. But what I really mean is not yet. As soon as he's ready, I'd love for him to be able to go out for a drive. Just not at 11. You know, and I'm not saying this because it's always the reason for our waiting. But sometimes it is. Sometimes we are being made to wait because God is looking after us. Because he knows that actually in this moment it won't be a blessing but will cause us harm. But in every time of waiting, God is always at work to see us grow and mature. He doesn't want our waiting to be wasted. So you can have hope in the waiting because God works while you wait. And in the waiting, you are becoming. And then you can have hope in the waiting because while you wait on God, you wait with God. And this is what Christmas is all about, isn't it? Emmanuel, God with us. You know, at the start of Matthew's gospel, you know, he tells us that when Jesus is born, he is the fulfillment of this longing, of this promise that's been spoken through the prophet Isaiah for Emmanuel. And then at the end, in Matthew 28, Jesus' last words to his followers, it's like bookends to the whole thing. His last words to his followers, surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Knowing God with us changes everything. John Wesley's last words before he died were, the best of all is that God is with us. The best of all is that God is with us. You know, this truth, when it sinks into your heart, is enough to anchor you no matter what or no matter how long your waiting might be. You know, in the midst of your questions and wrestles in the waiting, you know, the enemy will come at you in two different ways. First, to try and convince you that God isn't at work, which we've already talked about, and then to try and persuade you that you're all alone. And neither one of those things is true for anyone who has put their hope in Jesus, because he is Emmanuel, God with us. Always, to the end of the age. When we can see him, and when we're not sure where he is or what's going on or why things are happening, God says, I am with you. And when we get hold of this, it transforms our perspective. And perspective, I think, in times of waiting is the most important thing. It's exactly what we need. And one of the old presidents of America, Theodore Roosevelt, he had a nightly ritual that I think we can learn from when it comes to keeping perspective. He would go with a friend out every single night. He would go out with a friend and he would look at the stars in the sky. And then he would say this. He would say, that is the spiral galaxy of Andromeda. It is as large as our Milky Way. It is one of the 100 million galaxies. It is 750,000 light years away. It consists of 100 billion suns, each larger than our own. And then he'd pause for a moment, and then he said this. Now I think we feel small enough. Let's go to bed. You know, there's something about looking at the stars that helps us see how big God is and how small we are. How often, though, instead of going to bed having looked at the glow of the stars, do we go to bed having been looking at the glow of our phones? I know I do. And it's dangerous. Because we go to bed comparing ourselves with other people and what they're putting out into the world. Or we go to bed having had advertising put fresh in our minds and this message that if we just have this or that, then we'll be happier. Or we go to bed having been reading about other people's problems or writing to them about our own. We go to bed in one way or another with things centered around us. We go to bed with the wrong perspective. And one of the most important things that we can do is to remind ourselves first thing in the morning and last thing at night of the promises of God, of who He is, that He is at work while we wait, that He is with us in every moment. And for us to stay in that place long enough that it shapes our perspective in our waiting, that we're able to say like Theodore Roosevelt, okay, now I've been in that place long enough that I know how big God is, how small I am. And so I can rest, I can go to bed, I can get on with my day, knowing that He is at work, knowing that He is with me. So it'll be okay. When we do that, we'll have hope in the waiting. And we'll learn how to wait well. I want to finish with just asking you a couple of questions, just for you to kind of think about and things. Here's the first one. In times of waiting, do you tend to wait passively, actively, or controllingly? In times of waiting, do you tend to wait passively, actively, or controllingly? Passive waiting is either a sign that you're lazy, that you don't care, or that you've given up. There's no hope, there's no sense of expectation in passive waiting. Controlling waiting is when you're constantly saying, God, you're not on time, you're not on my schedule, doing things the way I want you to do them. And so I'm going to try and take the reins to make things happen. To force what I want because I'm frustrated. I don't want to wait. I want to see things happen right now. So because your ways are not my ways, I'm going to take control. And God is inviting us not to be people who passively or controllingly wait, but instead to actively wait. That means waiting with anticipation and expectation. Coming to Him every day, persevering in prayer, preparing ourselves and our circumstances as much as we're able to, reminding ourselves and taking time to kind of praise Him and to thank Him for who He is, that He is at work while we wait, that He's with us in every moment, surrendering our timing and our plans each day and declaring that we trust Him. And if you realize that you've become passive in your waiting, that there's been things God promised or things that were there in the past, and the reality is you've just kind of given up on it and passively waiting, then God is wanting to remind you of His promises, to stir faith and hope in your heart today. And if you realize that you've become frustrated in your waiting and you've been trying to take control to force things, to make things happen, then God is wanting to say to you today, it's okay. You can trust me. I am at work, and I am with you. So in your waiting, do you tend to wait passively, actively, or controllingly? And then my second question, which might seem a strange one at first, but hopefully will start to make sense in a moment. When you wait, how do you sit? When you wait, how do you sit? I don't know if you can think back to a time when you've been sat in a waiting room. I'm sure we've all been sat in waiting rooms at different times. And depending on what you're waiting for, people tend to sit differently. One of the things that I've noticed is that when you're nervous or you're on edge, you're anxious, you tend to sit on the edge of your seat. You're kind of ready to go at any moment. You're on high alert. But when you're relaxed, you tend to sit back. And I don't know where you're at today, maybe not physically, but it kind of inside. Maybe you feel like everything is on the edge of your seat. You're feeling anxious, or maybe you wouldn't describe it as anxious. Maybe you're feeling the pressure, and that pressure just makes you feel always on edge, like you've got to be ready to go. And God is saying, it's time to trust me and sit back.